The last Halloween party promised joy, but delivered death. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. Drop your city below. I always read your comments. Wolfe takes the floor. If Nero Wolfe had his way, October would be cancelled. It meddles with the sun, turns decent vegetables into decor, and tempts the city into thinking a cold is a costume. On the last Friday of the month, he was in his chair, broad as a throne and as welcoming as granite, with a book on medieval cookery, open but not progressing. He was in one of those moods where he reads the same sentence 3 times and blames the sentence. I was at my desk auditing the house accounts. There are men who stalk danger and men who stalk typos. On a slow week, I multitask. When the doorbell rang, Fritz called from the hallway that he had it, which saved me the walk and gave Wolfe a chance to pretend he didn't hear. It wasn't until Fritz's footsteps came back, followed by a rustle like tissue paper and the faint spice of outside air, that Wolfe lifted his head. The rustle belonged to a woman who had committed hard to October. Black dress, orange scarf, and a white paper mask cut to cover only the top half of her face. It wasn't a masquerade mask with feathers and flourishes. It was the kind they hand out to kids for crafts. It made her beautiful eyes look like a theatrical production of honesty, and her mouth, which was unmasked and tight, handle all the complicated parts. "Mr. Wolfe," she said. Her voice had training, too even for the weather, with a mezzo warmth that didn't expect a return. "I'm Mariana Dacre." "Miss or Mrs.?" I asked, because someone had to start somewhere. "Miss," she said. "And I apologize for the mask. I didn't want to be recognized on the street." "That presumes recognition," I said, settling back, "which New York only extends to people who are trying to hail taxis." The eyes behind the paper glanced at me and then passed to Wolfe, who hadn't risen and never would unless the house was on fire or beer had learned to walk. He gave her the small salute he uses for clients and kings, which is the same, a slight incline. "If you are uncertain of your reception in public, Miss Dacre, you could have arranged a more discreet entry than a mask of stationery," he said. "But as the choice is made, sit. Archie, her coat." She did not offer a coat. Under the scarf and the paper, she was travel-light. I got the door and took her to the red chair. She sat on the edge, shoulders squared, as if the chair were going to ask her questions she had rehearsed answers for. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I need you to prevent a murder." Wolfe's eyes shut briefly and opened. It wasn't a flinch. It was the millisecond he allows himself to detest melodrama. "Bah, we do not hustle homicide," he said. "Go to the police." "I did," she said. "They told me to call 911 if anything happens." "Sound advice," Wolfe said dryly. "It is also free. Why not be content with it?" "Because if anything happens is tomorrow night," she said, "and in a room with 100 masks, telling the police to be ready is like telling the ocean to be dry." She set her hands in her lap, fingers laced. Her right thumb worked against her left in small circles. The mask made it hard to read her face, but not her hands. "Explain," Wolfe said. "There's a party," she said. "An annual thing, the last Halloween party. It started as a joke among friends. One last night before November insists we be serious. Over the years it became a tradition. We rotate hosts. This year it's at the Delancey house." She paused, then clarified for my benefit. "A private event space on the Lower East Side. It's exclusive." "You're the hostess?" I asked. "No." The mask tipped as she shook her head. "I was. I resigned 2 days ago." "From hosting duties or from your friends?" I said. She made the same small pause you get when someone discovers their breath costs extra here. "From both," she said, and the resignation did not go well. Wolfe made a small noise, which, from him, is a polite boulder rolling downhill. "Miss Dacre, this office is not a sanctuary for social reconsideration. If you wish, Archie can direct you to a therapist with commendable discretion." "I don't need therapy." she said. "I need witness and strategy." I glanced at Wolfe. Witness is romantic. Strategy is billable. "What prompts your fear of murder?" he asked. She lifted her chin, and the paper edge scraped her cheek. "Because I know these people. Because I have already been threatened. And because we built a machine that runs on humiliation, and tomorrow is the night it asks for more." "If you want the long version," I said, "we charge extra, but it comes with coffee." "The long version won't help until you understand the short," she said, and her mouth curved for the first time. Not a smile exactly, but the ghost of one. She had the air of someone who had been charming for a living and had now filed for early retirement. "We play a game at the last Halloween party," she said. "Masks are mandatory, real names are not. After midnight, there's a trial of sorts. An accusation, a defense, a verdict. It's always something edgy but harmless. Theft of a kiss, plagiarized costume. Usually it's staged. The accused knows. The accuser plays their part. The verdict is laughter. This year, it won't be harmless. Someone is going to use the stage to destroy a person." "That happens every day on smaller platforms," Wolfe said. "Why is tomorrow special?" "Because it's being framed as justice," she said, "and because the person they plan to destroy is me." The paper mask suddenly seemed less theatrical. It was armor cut with kindergarten scissors. "Who is they?" I asked. "My friends," she said, with that thing in her voice people get when they try the word on and it doesn't fit anymore. "Or the people who were my friends until 2 days ago. The committee. We never gave it a clever name because we didn't need to. There are 6 of us." "There were," she corrected herself. "Julie, Camden, Otis, Pippa, Hal, and me." "And their surnames?" Wolfe asked without looking at me, which meant I was going to write them down anyway. "Juliana Pruitt, Camden Nash, Otis Everly, Philippa Vale, Hal Reinhardt. You can look them up if you like. You'll find theater producers, a tech investor, a food writer, an event designer, and a lawyer who never lost except when he meant to." "And you?" I asked. "I organize illusions," she said. "Not in the stage magician sense. I coordinate charity galas, performative dinners, disguised auctions. I used to curate the canvas that other people used to paint themselves better." "You resigned 2 days ago," Wolfe said. "Why?" "Because I found out what the theme would be," she said. "It's not a costume theme, it's a narrative. They plan to accuse our guest of honor of stealing from a fund we built 10 years ago. They chose the right button to press: justice, transparency, the thrilling righteousness of public accounting, and they wired it to me. They have documents, or things they will call documents, emails they will brand as proof, a witness with a mask who will swear he saw me divert funds. And at midnight, in a room that expects a performance, they plan to ruin me." "Did you steal the money?" I asked. She didn't glance at me. She looked at Wolfe and said evenly, "No." Wolfe made a slow steeple of his fingers and let it collapse on a sigh. I can tell you a lot about Wolfe's sighs. There's the one that starts when you mention exercise. There's the one that ends when beer arrives. This one is reserved for when a client insists on innocence and he suspects he'll have to prove it for them. "If you're innocent, the police would be the appropriate venue," he said. "If you are guilty, your appearance here is an imbecility. What is it you believe we can do?" "Not prevent the party," she said. "I tried. The space is paid for. The guest list is a waiting room at an airport. Half of them are there to leave, not to arrive, and nobody gives up a stage when they've built one. I need you to keep me from being convicted by the performance. I need you to show the jury that the script is a lie." "By jury, you mean," I started. "I mean everyone who will see the fragments and swear they saw the whole," she said. "Phones will be out. The accusation will live longer than any of us. I've dealt in illusions long enough to know how much they weigh and where they land." Wolfe closed the book he hadn't read and set it on the stand. He didn't look at me, which told me he wasn't going to ask me to throw her out. He also didn't ring for bear, which meant he was thinking with all the oxygen God gave him. "Money?" he asked. "I can pay your fee," she said, and named a number that would keep the brownstone in orchids and me in neckties until Thanksgiving. "Good," Wolfe said, "because we do not accept payment in righteousness. What do you have besides your protestations?" "Caution," she said, "and a reason they would prefer to ignore." "Which is?" She hesitated. The paper crinkled as the muscles around her eyes tightened. 10 years ago, she said, when we started the fund, we wrote a charter. It was a joke at first, but we cleaned it up for the tax gods. This year, when I said I wouldn't host, they sent me a revised charter to sign. I read it. I always read. The revision gives the committee authority to liquidate the fund and distribute its assets to current officers in the event of reputational harm to the organization. I was the current treasurer. If I'm discredited, the money doesn't go to the charity, it goes to them. That, Wolfe said, would be an incentive. "I told the police that too," she said. "They told me it sounds like a civil dispute." "And you want us to attend a party," I said, "to keep a room full of costumed adults from deciding you're a villain." "I want you to attend a party to decide who the villain is," she said, "before the room does it for you." "Who invited you here?" Wolfe asked. "No one," she said. "I found you because you are a man to whom rooms bend." Wolfe's mouth tucked in. This was praise he could tolerate, because it was accurate, and also because it implied the room would bring him beer without him moving. He studied her. The paper mask didn't quiver. "Archie," he said. "The time?" "5:15, I said. "Miss Dacre," Wolfe went on, "you will leave with Mr. Goodwin. He will accompany you to your home or wherever you have the documents and correspondence you mentioned. He will also consult with one Saul Panzer, whose discretion is a fact and whose efficacy is a faith. He will reconnoiter your party's apparatus and report to me by 10 this evening." She sat back a half-inch, which for her was a sun-soaked sprawl. "You'll take the case." "I will consider it," he said. "You just assigned him," she said. "I assigned him to the task of collecting the minimum matter necessary for my decision," Wolfe said. "It could be that a modicum of scrutiny will suffice to show you a liar, or a fool, or worse, a victim of your own theatrics. In any of those circumstances, I will decline." "And if I'm neither?" she asked. "Then you shall have your witness and your strategy," he said, "with the understanding that I will not perform on a stage. I do not leave this chair for pageants. If I act, it will be from here." "That's fine," she said, with a breath that sounded like someone rearranging the furniture in her chest. "You'll find what you need with me. The rest, I can't promise." "Nothing is promised," he said. "Except dinner." He pulled the bell cord. Fritz materialized, efficient as ever. "Fritz," Wolfe said, "bring beer." "Of course," Fritz said, and vanished as if he had brewed it under the stairs. "Miss Dacre," I said, rising, "before we raid your papers, give me the itinerary. Time, place, who's wearing what?" "We don't announce costumes," she said. "Half the point is misrecognition. But the theme this year, before it curdled, was unmaskings. People will be layered, masks over veils over makeup. We start at 9. The trial is at midnight because we believe in symbolism we don't honor. I have the guest list. We keep it capped at 100 with a waiting list people treat as religion." "Location again?" I asked. "Delancey House, 3rd floor. There's an alley entrance with a service elevator. We used it to bring in props." "Props," I said. "Tables that look like tombs," she said. "A fog machine, a confectioner's guillotine." "I beg your pardon," I said. "It's for slicing cake," she said, and that ghost of a smile came back. "Though this year they'll be happy if it slices a reputation." The beer arrived. Fritz set a bottle on Wolfe's desk, poured into the heavy glass, and left on a tide of good manners. Wolfe took a sip and eased back. "Miss Dacre," he said, "you will remove your mask." She reached up, slow. The paper came away. The face beneath it was not in need of hiding, which isn't always the point. There were 2 pale grooves where the elastic had stayed too long. There were eyes that had been busy, a mouth that had been useful, and a nose that would never be accused of being coy. She met Wolfe's gaze as if she had already rehearsed it. "You may replace it on the street," he said. "Mr. Goodwin will hail you a cab, and after we collect your materials, you will join him at Mr. Panzer's office to brief him. If you have told me the truth, and if your enemies have elected to be obvious, we will conclude before dinner tomorrow that you are savable. I do not care to risk indigestion." She stood, and for the first time she looked around the office with curiosity instead of calculation. The globe, the books, the desk that is mine and therefore has personality. She nodded to Wolfe. "Thank you," she said, "for considering it." He grunted, which is approval in the original tongue. Out in the hallway, she took a breath and put the mask back on. The paper made a whisper against the scarf. On the stoop, the wind had opinions. I flagged a cab and handed her in. Before I closed the door, she caught my wrist, light. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "if they're right, if I'm wrong, you'll tell me before they do." "That depends," I said, "on how you take news, and who brought the cake." She let go. The cab took her toward Delancey in the kind of hurry downtown reserves for guilt and delivery. I watched her fade into traffic, then headed back in for my hat and a gun that wasn't a gun, a notebook, a pencil, and the address book that knows everybody worth knowing. Wolfe was back in his chair, eyes on the book but not pretending now. "Archie," he said as I passed, "a woman who fears a stage will either flee it or build one she can survive. Determine which." "Sure," I said. "While I'm at it, do you want me to pick up a fog machine?" "Phooey," he said without heat. "Bring me facts, and see if Saul is free to attend a party without becoming one." "Consider him invited," I said, and went out into the October that had not asked permission to exist. The cab, with Miss Dacre, vanished into the October dusk, and I headed back inside to collect the usual gear Wolfe calls preliminaries, and I call the things that keep us from looking like amateurs. A fresh notebook, 3 sharp pencils, and the Rolodex that holds names even the phone book would blush to print. When I came back through the office, Wolfe was still holding his beer like it was an oracle and staring into space as though the facts might get nervous and present themselves. He gave me a half-nod that meant he expected results before digestion set in. The ride downtown was the usual New York rush-hour carnival. Horns, exhaust, and a pedestrian population that had apparently mistaken the crosswalk for a stage. Mariana Dacre sat stiff beside me, her mask back in place and her scarf pulled higher. She didn't talk until we turned onto Lafayette, and then only to give me an address. It was a converted loft that had the air of once being a garment factory, and now being ashamed of it. Upstairs, her apartment was tidy in the way that only belongs to people who don't spend much time in them. Glass tables, modern angles, not a fingerprint out of place. The exception was the desk by the window. That was papered over with correspondence, receipts, and a leather-bound ledger that looked like it belonged to a monk who had done penance in finance. "This is everything," she said, gesturing. "Invoices, emails, the original charter, the revised draft. If they've manufactured documents, they'll have to make them look like these." "Fine," I said, and began sorting. She had organized it with color-coded tabs, which saved me the trouble of playing archaeologist. I flipped through, copied the relevant dates into my notebook, and pocketed 3 letters that looked like they'd play well in Wolfe's chair later. One in particular, a polite but pointed memo from Reinhardt the lawyer, pressing her to sign the revision, had the kind of pushiness Wolfe loves to pin to a specimen board. While I worked, Mariana sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tight. She wasn't jittery, but she had the stillness of someone working hard, not to be. I asked her a few questions. Who drafted the revision? Reinhardt and Pruitt. Who handled the fund's money? She did, but with all transactions reviewed by the group. Who would gain most if she were ruined? All of them, but especially Camden Nash, the tech investor who had debts hidden behind a glossy portfolio. Every answer was concise, rehearsed. She'd been preparing this script as long as the others had been preparing theirs. By 9, I had the papers in order. I called Saul Panzer. Saul never sounds surprised, not even when you ask him to walk into a Halloween party designed by lunatics with money. He agreed to meet me at his office in an hour. Mariana and I left together. She hailed another cab, this time without a word. I watched her go, then walked down Houston towards Saul's place. The city was busy rehearsing its own Halloween, shop windows full of skulls and half-dressed vampires, kids in capes rehearsing their sugar runs a night early. It made me think about Wolfe's orchids upstairs in their warm, immaculate rooms, unaware there was a holiday at all. At Saul's office, a cubbyhole over a print shop, I laid out the story. He listened without interrupting, just jotting a few notes in that spider hand of his. When I finished, he asked 2 questions. What time's the curtain? And what do they expect you to do? I told him midnight and play defense. He nodded. I'll do recon at the venue tomorrow afternoon. Check entrances, exits, crowd flow. You'll want eyes outside as much as in. That was Saul. Never more words than required, but everyone earning its keep. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was close to 10. Wolfe was at his desk with the day's second beer, which meant he'd been waiting. I gave him the short version, then the papers. He studied the lawyer's memo for a long moment, eyes narrowing the way they do when he decides someone has insulted him by existing. He set it down carefully, as though it might try to crawl away. Miss Dacre, he said finally, is not without acumen. If she lies, it is with sophistication. If she tells the truth, her enemies have prepared with comparable cunning. Either way, Archie, we are committed. Saul's in, I said. Of course he is. Wolfe leaned back, shut his eyes, and folded his hands over his middle. There is an odor of calculation here that offends me. They seek to employ theatre as tribunal. I do not permit anyone to employ falsehood as fact without my leave. He opened his eyes, sharp as glass. Tomorrow, Archie, you will attend their masquerade. You will observe with vigilance. You will identify their stagecraft and their flaws. And when they unmask their accusation, we shall be prepared to unmask them. He reached for his glass. Now, he added, we will have dinner. And that was Wolfe's way of announcing that the game had officially begun. The next morning began with eggs, coffee, and Wolfe in the plant rooms upstairs, which meant I had 2 hours of free rein before the case came knocking again. By the time he descended, rotund and serene as if orchids were superior to breakfast, I'd already made 3 calls. One to confirm Saul's surveillance plan, one to a contact in the event planning racket for background on Delancey House, and one to Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Lon didn't know about the last Halloween party specifically, but he'd heard the names: Pruitt, the producer, Nash, the tech man with champagne debt, Everly, the food writer with a reputation for slander in print, Vale, the designer who collected rivals the way some women collected purses, and Reinhardt, the lawyer who could turn a parking ticket into a philosophy lecture. In Lon's words, they were social oxygen, hard to breathe around, harder to live without. Not exactly the type you want gunning for you in a masquerade courtroom. I passed all this to Wolfe while he buttered a muffin. He listened with his usual absorption and grunted when I mentioned Nash's debts. A man who needs money will do many things, he muttered, but a man who believes himself clever will do worse. The plan was simple. I'd make the rounds that day and feel out the suspects before the party. It wasn't unusual. Half the time, Wolfe prefers to see his chessboard set before he makes his first move. He told me to begin with Juliana Pruitt, the producer, since she was the one with the loudest talent for dramatics. The woman had a reputation for staging scenes out of gossip columns, and if this party was going to be a theater of humiliation, chances were good she was directing from the wings. Her office was on West 52nd, in a building that smelled like velvet, dust, and old applause. When I introduced myself, she gave me a long look, the kind you give a man who might be either a threat or an audition. Pruitt was tall, dyed blonde, with cheekbones that could have cut fabric and a laugh that could have filled a theater. She didn't bother to deny knowing Mariana, and when I mentioned the party, her eyes lit up like marquee bulbs. "It's tradition," she said, reclining in her chair with one arm draped like she owned the city. "Every year it gets bigger. This year we've added a twist, a moral arc. That's what keeps it fresh." "Some say it's more than fresh," I told her. "Some say it's rotten." Her smile flickered, but only briefly. "Ah, Miss Dacre sent you, didn't she?" I should have known. She was always suspicious, always afraid the performance would overtake her, which I suppose it has. "What exactly is she supposed to have done?" I asked. "She knows," Pruitt said smoothly. "And tomorrow night, so will everyone else. It's justice, Mr. Goodwin. Don't look so grim. It's all in good fun. No one dies of embarrassment." She said it with a cheeriness that was too rehearsed, like a line spoken in rehearsal 100 times until the meaning was dulled. I didn't press. Wolfe doesn't like when I rattle cages too hard without a reason. But I left with the sense that Pruitt was savoring the stage too much to care whether the script was true or not. A woman like that could frame her own mother if it sold tickets. Next was Camden Nash. He had a sleek office in a co-working space where everyone looked like they were pitching a new app to save the world. Nash himself wore a tailored jacket that tried to disguise his frayed nerves, but the tremor in his knee under the desk gave him away. He was cordial but edgy, the kind of man who makes small talk while measuring whether you've guessed his balance sheet. I asked about the party. His smile stretched too quick. "Ah, the last Halloween. One of my favorite traditions. A little theater keeps everyone honest." "Even if the theater lies?" I asked. He chuckled, but it was hollow. "Miss Dacre should have thought about that before. If you want my opinion, she's overdue for accountability. We can't have frauds sitting at the table." The word fraud hung between us like smoke. I didn't push further. His type collapses under pressure if you wait long enough. But it was clear, if someone stood to gain by Mariana's ruin, Nash had the need and the appetite. By late afternoon, I'd made stops with the other three. Otis Everly, the food writer, was sour-faced and bitter about old slights, practically salivating at the idea of a public shaming. Pippa Vale, the event designer, wrapped her ambition in silk and spoke like the whole affair was an installation piece, art at Mariana's expense. And Reinhardt, the lawyer, was the most careful of the lot. No admissions, no slips, just a smile that said he knew how to win even when he lost. By the time I returned to the brownstone, I had a notebook full of motives, contradictions, and enough smug self-assurance to fill a banquet hall. Wolfe listened in silence while I delivered the goods. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "They are united," he said, "yet not equal. Each has a motive, but some have urgency, others mere indulgence. The lawyer seeks authority, the producer seeks spectacle, the investor seeks relief, the writer seeks revenge, and the designer seeks relevance. They converge in a conspiracy, but such alliances are brittle. The question, Archie, is whether their structure is sound enough to endure exposure. Tomorrow they shall be tested." He closed his eyes, signaling dismissal, but opened them again as I reached the door. "One more thing. Tonight you will contact Mr. Panzer. Tell him to prepare for shadows and whispers. There will be more at stake than money or reputation. Men and women who build a stage for falsehood are capable of worse." That was Wolfe's version of a warning. I nodded, slipped my notebook into my pocket, and headed for the phone. The last Halloween party was shaping up to be a carnival of egos, grudges, and one carefully chosen victim. Whether Mariana Dacre was innocent or not, someone planned to make her the mask that cracked at midnight. And Wolfe, as always, intended to be the one who decided how the curtain would fall. The next day, Halloween itself began under a sky the color of old slate. Wolfe treated the morning like any other, which meant orchids first, breakfast second, and the world's problems a distant third. He didn't mention Mariana or her masquerade until he was settled at his desk with his first beer, and even then it was less a conversation than a decree. "You will attend tonight," he said. "Mr. Panzer will be in place earlier, and Mr. Durkin will provide a secondary watch from the street. Your concern, Archie, is twofold. Identify the mechanics of their charade, and preserve Miss Dacre from collapse until such time as I choose to intervene. You will not attempt to prevent the spectacle entirely. We require it to unfold." "That's a nice way of saying you want the show to go on," I told him, "as long as you get to run the encore." Wolfe's eyelids lowered. "Phooey. I want the guilty to reveal themselves. In theater, as in life, pretense collapses under its own weight if the structure is nudged. Our task is to observe the collapse." That was Wolfe for you. Send me out to wade through costumed mayhem while he sat at home nudging from his chair. Still, I couldn't argue the point. We didn't have evidence, just tension and motives thick enough to slice with Fritz's carving knife. If the committee intended to humiliate Mariana at midnight, our job was to let them set the stage and then strip the curtain when they were too committed to retreat. I spent the afternoon with Saul reconnoitering Delancey House. It was the kind of rented space that thought chandeliers and exposed brick made it history. Saul had already charted the place with the precision of a surveyor. The third-floor ballroom had a dais at one end for speeches or, in this case, trials. There were two main entrances, front stairs for guests, service elevator for staff, and one fire escape disguised with heavy curtains. Saul walked me through it like a general briefing a lieutenant. He pointed out vantage points for observation, blind corners, and where he'd be if things got lively. "Don't expect me to stop the act," he said. "My job is to see who slips up when they think no one's looking. You'll be visible. I won't." That was exactly how Wolfe liked it. Saul the shadow, me the bait, Wolfe the brain. A triangle of strategy. By 9 o'clock, the party was in full swing. Masks everywhere. Gold, black, grotesque, playful. Veils, feathers, papier-mâché skulls. Half the city's moneyed social climbers seemed determined to outdo one another in how little sense they could make while still sipping champagne. I wore a simple domino mask and a tux that hadn't been rented. If I was going to be Archie Goodwin at a masquerade, I might as well be myself with minor adjustments. Finding the suspects in the sea of disguises wasn't as hard as it might have been. Pruitt was unmistakable in a crimson gown and a harlequin mask, holding court like the mistress of ceremonies. Nash had chosen sleek black, but the nervous tap of his foot under the table betrayed him even with half his face hidden. Everly was hunched in a skeletal cloak, gnawing on words to anyone who would listen. Pippa Vale floated like a wisp of silk, her mask a delicate butterfly that matched her smug smile. And Reinhardt, well, he'd gone for subtle, just a simple dark suit and silver mask, but the way he shook hands and murmured reassurances marked him as the man behind the script. Mariana arrived late, face fully masked this time, not with paper but with a porcelain half-mask painted white and gold. It was elegant and distant, exactly what she needed. I drifted near her long enough to let her know Saul and I were in place, then moved off again. No sense in painting a target on her back by standing too close. The night wore on with music, drinking, and the kind of laughter that sounds more like competition than joy. At 1:45, the energy shifted. Guests began drifting toward the dais, taking seats or standing with expectant eyes. The trial, the unmasking, was about to begin. I felt the current of the room tighten as Pruitt took the stage, crimson against the black-draped platform. She raised her hands for silence, and the crowd obeyed like trained seals. Her voice rang out, bright and theatrical. Friends, revelers, masked and unmasked, we gather for our tradition, to unveil truth, to weigh jest against justice, to make merry with masks and meanings. Tonight, we have before us a matter grave enough to demand your judgment. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Champagne glasses tilted, masks leaned forward. I could feel the suspense working exactly as planned. Behind me, near the service door, I caught sight of Saul slipping into a shadowed alcove. Good. He was in position. Pruitt continued, her words sharp as spotlight. We stand betrayed. The fund we built, the cause we cherished, has been poisoned, and the hand that guided it, the hand of our treasurer, has been caught in the till. Tonight we put Mariana Dacre on trial. Gasps and murmurs spread like wildfire. Mariana rose slowly from her chair, mask gleaming pale under the lights. I felt the whole room tilt toward her, eager for drama. Reinhardt stepped forward next, papers in hand, his voice steady as stone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have documents. Proof of misappropriation, of theft disguised as charity, witnesses who saw the diversion. This is no mere rumor. It is fact. He held the papers high, and the crowd strained to see. From my angle, I couldn't catch the text, but I caught something else. Nash's eyes flicking nervously toward Everly, Everly's smirk tightening, Pippa Vale shifting closer to Pruitt as if rehearsed. The choreography was too neat. The trial had begun. And if Wolfe's instincts were right, the cracks were about to show. The crowd leaned in as Reinhardt laid the papers on the lectern with the ceremony of a priest revealing scripture. He spoke of accounts, transfers, dates, and discrepancies, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had never met a jury he couldn't hypnotize. From where I stood, the details were vague enough to be uncheckable and dramatic enough to seem conclusive. A perfect recipe for performance masquerading as proof. Mariana stayed silent, standing at the edge of the dais, porcelain mask forward. Her hands were steady at her sides, which told me two things. She had either rehearsed her composure, or she wasn't lying. Pruitt fed the crowd with exclamations at just the right moments, her red gown a beacon. Nash muttered confirmations from the front row. Everly chuckled darkly in the back, and Vale fluttered like an elegant moth, whispering to her neighbors as if the outcome were already certain. Theatrics were thick in the air, and Wolfe had predicted correctly. They were relying on the room's hunger for spectacle. That's the thing about an audience. They prefer conviction to truth because conviction has rhythm. I scanned the scene and caught Saul's eyes from the shadows across the room. He gave the faintest nod, then shifted his gaze to the dais, a signal that he'd spotted something worth noting. I trusted Saul's instincts, so I let my own eyes drift more carefully over the stage. The papers Reinhardt waved looked official enough. Letterhead, stamps, the works, but his grip on them was too careful, always folded back just enough that no one could get a clean look. Evidence that hides itself isn't evidence. It's costume. Reinhardt launched into a final flourish, his words sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, the crime is clear. The betrayal is plain. Our treasurer has siphoned funds meant for children and the vulnerable. She has stolen not only money, but trust. The crowd hummed, uneasy and eager, all at once. Pruitt leaned in, hungry for applause. Vale dabbed her lips with a silk handkerchief like she was at an opera. It was working. Mariana finally moved. She stepped forward, her mask catching the light, and spoke with a calm that carried farther than Reinhardt's fury. "And yet," she said, "you've shown nothing but paper you won't let anyone read. You've spoken of witnesses you won't name. If this is justice, then I should be laughing. But I'm not laughing, because you've built a gallows and you don't care who hangs as long as it isn't you. That landed. A ripple went through the crowd, some shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. A handful even muttered agreement. But Pruitt clapped her hands sharply, like a conductor, pulling the orchestra back into line. "The accused always protests," she cried. "It's part of the ritual. But tonight we reveal the truth. Mr. Nash, your testimony." Nash rose, a little stiffly, and adjusted his black mask. His voice wavered at first, but steadied as he leaned into the script. He swore he had seen transactions shifted in Mariana's favor, that she had taken liberties with the fund, that he had tried to warn the others. Every line sounded prepared, like a man rehearsing excuses before his creditors. I edged closer to the stage, watching faces. Vale's eyes tracked Nash nervously, as if she worried he'd go off script. Everly smirked with too much satisfaction, as though enjoying the taste of someone else's downfall, and Reinhardt, always precise, gave the faintest nod whenever Nash hit the marks, like a director cueing an actor. The whole thing reeked of collaboration, and Wolfe would want every detail. I scribbled notes while the farce continued, but it was Saul who caught the slip. I saw him shift from his shadowed alcove, angling for a better view. Following his line of sight, I spotted it too. Pruitt had a folder tucked beneath the lectern, half hidden by her gown. When Nash faltered for a moment, she reached down and glanced at it, flipping a page before nodding him forward. A script plain as day. I moved casually toward the back, circling so I could intercept Saul without attracting notice. He leaned just enough to whisper, "They're reading from cue sheets, not testimony, lines." It fit perfectly. Wolfe had been right again. They'd built this trial like a play, with Mariana cast as villain and themselves as righteous chorus. Back on stage, Mariana lifted her chin. "If you believe this, then let me see the papers. Let everyone see them. Let them read." Reinhardt gave a smooth chuckle. "We cannot endanger private data. Confidential accounts must remain sealed, but the truth is plain." "Plain to whom?" Mariana asked sharply. "To the 5 of you who profit if I fall, or to everyone else watching you recite your lines?" That struck harder than I expected. A couple of guests laughed, short and skeptical. Pruitt snapped her gaze toward them, furious at the breach, but the air had changed. What was certainty minutes ago now had questions stitched into it. I felt the tug of Wolfe's plan pulling taut. This was the moment. Let them show the seams. Let them trip over their own confidence. All I had to do was hold the line, take in every fracture, and report back. At the dais, Pruitt raised her arms again, her crimson gown catching the light. "Enough stalling. We call for a verdict." But before she could speak the next word, Everly blurted out something unscripted. His voice cracked with relish, too loud for the room's silence. "She wasn't just stealing money. She was stealing from us." The words weren't in Reinhardt's careful rhythm. They hit like a rock tossed into glass. And the looks that passed between Vale, Nash, and Reinhardt told me that, at last, the cracks had started to widen. The room reacted to Everly's outburst like a flock of pigeons spooked from a ledge. Sudden wings, startled noise, scattered attention. The script had slipped, and it showed. Pruitt's head snapped toward him, eyes flashing behind her harlequin mask, but it was too late. His words were already running laps around the crowd. "Stealing from us." That was no polished accusation aimed at Mariana. That was a grudge given a microphone. Nash tried to plaster it over, clapping his hands like he was leading applause. "Exactly. She betrayed the whole group," he said too quickly. His voice wobbled, and I could see sweat purling at his temple even in the dim light. Vale's smile was brittle, pasted on like the final coat of paint hiding a cracked wall. And Reinhardt, the man who never lost control, leaned forward with a glare that would have drilled holes through Everly if glares carried augers. Mariana, to her credit, didn't flinch. She turned her mask toward the crowd and raised her voice, clear and deliberate. You heard him. Not the lawyer. Not the producer. Not the investor with his tidy rehearsals. You heard the truth slip out, the truth of resentment, not justice. They want what I won't give them. That is why they invented this spectacle. That line hit its mark. People shifted, murmured, glanced sidelong at one another. I watched a man in a fox mask whisper to his companion, both of them frowning. The mood was teetering. The more they tried to play it as fact, the more it started to smell like theater. Pruitt, realizing the tide, raised her voice to an operatic pitch. This is not chaos. It is revelation. You've heard the testimony. You've seen the evidence. The verdict is clear. She swept her arm toward the audience, demanding a chorus of agreement. What she got was a hesitant smattering of applause, then silence. It was the silence that mattered. Audiences can forgive bad lines, but they can't forgive seeing the seams in the set. I spotted Saul slipping through the crowd again, moving with the invisibility only he could manage. He leaned near me just enough to murmur, "Reinhardt's folder," swapped pages. Vale passed him new ones mid-speech. "I've got photos." Then he was gone again, a shadow retreating before anyone noticed. That was gold. If Vale was feeding Reinhardt new lines mid-trial, it wasn't testimony. It was choreography. Wolfe would have that mounted on his wall before dessert. Meanwhile, Everly seemed to realize he'd broken rank. He hunched deeper into his skeletal cloak, muttering about betrayal, but the words no longer synced with the others. Reinhardt tried to gather it back, voice steely. "We have incontrovertible proof, and the accused has offered nothing but denial. You know what that means." But he was wrong. I knew what it meant. It meant they hadn't expected resistance. They had counted on the crowd's hunger for drama, Mariana's supposed collapse, and their ability to surf the wave of righteousness. But when she didn't break, their timing fractured. And once the script cracked, everything else began to wobble. Mariana seized the moment. She stepped closer to the lectern, her voice steady but edged with fire. "If you truly have proof, lay it here. Let every guest read it. Let every phone in this room photograph it. Or admit that your papers are nothing more than props." That was the kill shot. A buzz of agreement rose around the hall. Someone shouted, "Show us the papers!" Another chimed in, "If it's true, prove it." The demand grew louder, pulsing with the momentum of a crowd that sensed it had been played. For the first time, Reinhardt faltered. He held the folder tight against his chest, eyes scanning the audience like a chess player realizing he was cornered 3 moves earlier than expected. Nash opened his mouth, shut it again. Vale leaned closer to Pruitt, whispering furiously. And Pruitt, crimson gown blazing under the lights, tried to salvage the act by snapping her fingers at the band for a drum roll, but even that sounded absurd against the rising chorus of suspicion. I caught Mariana's glance through the porcelain mask. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't need to. She knew she had weathered the storm. For now. Then something unexpected happened. A man in a simple half-mask rose from the back row, holding up his phone. His voice cut through the noise, sharp and unflinching. "I work with the fund's accounts. I've seen the records, and those transfers he's waving around don't exist." The room froze. Even Pruitt's hands, mid-gesture, dropped. Reinhardt's mask didn't slip, but his body did. The tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Whoever that man was, he had just detonated the script. The crowd erupted, some shouting questions, others moving closer to the dais. Vale clutched at Pruitt's arm. Everly cursed audibly. Nash looked ready to bolt. The 5 of them had lost the thread, and they knew it. I didn't need Wolfe sitting beside me to know what came next. The committee had been caught in its own snare. But the night wasn't over yet. A cornered group with ambition and motive could lash out in new ways, and I had no intention of letting Mariana face that without cover. I edged toward the dais, scanning the exits, the crowd, the suspects. Saul was already posted near the service elevator, watching every twitch. The storm was breaking, but what it washed away or uncovered wasn't certain yet. And back at the brownstone, Wolfe would be waiting for me to bring the whole tableau, every tremor and fracture, so he could lay it flat and cut it open with words sharper than any knife. The man with the phone didn't sit back down. He kept it held high, screen glowing like a lantern in the half-dark. "I can prove it," he said. "I'll send the statements to anyone here who doubts me. The numbers don't match what you've been told." That was the end of the performance. The crowd no longer leaned forward like obedient theater-goers. They surged to their feet, talking over one another, voices sharp and questioning. The controlled hush that Pruitt had worked so hard to cultivate was gone, replaced by the restless hum of skepticism. It was the sound of an audience deciding they'd been had. Mariana stood still, neither triumphant nor cowed. Her porcelain mask hid everything but her poise. Pruitt flailed her arms, crimson silk snapping like flags in a storm, but it only made her look desperate. Reinhardt snapped the folder shut with a motion too sharp to be casual and tucked it under his arm. Nash muttered something about lies, his knees shaking so violently I thought the chair beneath him might crack. Everly glared at the man with the phone, and Vale kept her gaze locked on the floor as if she could sink into it. Saul materialized at my shoulder. "We've got to move," he murmured. "They'll try to regroup. Someone in that bunch won't take public exposure lightly." He was right. I scanned the exits, watching for sudden movement. If Reinhardt decided the best defense was a fast retreat, or if Everly's temper carried him too far, the room could turn from a masquerade into a riot. But they held their ground, stiff with the realization that the illusion was crumbling. The man with the phone pressed forward. "If you claim justice, show us the proof. If not, then admit this was a farce." He was bold, maybe too bold. He didn't see Everly shifting closer, cloak brushing the floor. I did, and cut across the aisle, putting myself between them. "Evening," I said lightly, though my eyes stayed sharp. "Planning to object, counselor?" Everly's smirk twitched. "Stay out of it, Goodwin." "Wrong address," I said. "This is very much in it." The crowd had picked up the chant. "Show the papers, show the papers." It rolled like a wave through the hall. Pruitt's face under the harlequin mask was pale, her smile faltering. Nash tugged at his cuffs as though the seams of his jacket might provide escape. Reinhardt tried to speak over the noise, but the crowd wasn't listening anymore. Their appetite for theater had turned into a demand for answers, and the cast on stage didn't have them. Mariana turned to face them all, her voice slicing through the clamor. "You wanted a trial. Here it is. You've accused without proof. You've tried to use spectacle as judgment, and now, in front of everyone, you refuse to reveal the truth you claim to hold." The applause this time was real, sharp and spontaneous, and it wasn't for the committee. For the first time all night, Mariana had the stage, and she didn't need a script. I leaned toward Saul. Time we pulled her out before someone tries to salvage this with something uglier. He gave the faintest nod. While the crowd pressed closer to the dais, shouting for papers, Saul slipped toward the service elevator, securing a path. I stepped up beside Mariana and spoke just low enough for her to hear. "Show's over. Time to take your bow off stage." She hesitated, only a fraction of a second, then inclined her head. Together we edged through the press of bodies, which was easier now that the guests were more interested in confronting the would-be prosecutors. Vale tried to intercept us, murmuring about misunderstanding, but I steered Mariana past without slowing. Nash shouted something about lies and conspiracies, but it dissolved under the weight of the crowd's jeers. By the time we reached the elevator, Saul was holding it open. We slipped inside. the doors closing on the sound of Pruitt shrieking for order like a director abandoned by her cast. As the elevator descended, Mariana leaned against the wall, finally exhaling. "If you hadn't been there, you'd still be standing tall," I said. "They were the ones stumbling, but don't thank me yet. Wolfe won't settle for a half collapse. He'll want it clean." Her mask tilted toward me. "Then what happens now?" "Now," I said, "we go back to the brownstone. You give Wolfe every detail you held back, and he'll tell you what you already know. Your friends were rehearsing a robbery, not justice." The service door opened onto the alley, cool air hitting like a wake-up. Saul scanned the street, gave us a nod, and vanished again into the shadows. Mariana and I caught a cab, silent most of the ride uptown. Her hands were steady in her lap, but her shoulders carried the weight of what she'd just endured. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in the office, his bulk an immovable anchor in the red chair. He didn't rise as we entered, only watched as I guided Mariana to her seat. The air smelled faintly of orchids and Fritz's roast, as if the world outside had not just tried to crumble. "Report," Wolfe said. I laid it out. The folder, the cue sheets, Everly's outburst, the man with the phone, the crowd turning, our exit. Wolfe listened with his eyes half shut, fingers steepled. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "As expected," he said. "They attempted to weaponize illusion, and as expected, their structure could not bear scrutiny." Mariana leaned forward. "So it's over." "Over?" Wolfe opened his eyes fully, their weight pinning her to the chair. "No, Miss Dacre. You have survived the performance, but the play is not ended until I have assembled the cast in this room, compelled by their own duplicity, and shown them the truth they tried to pervert. That is when it ends." He rang for beer, as if to punctuate the sentence. "Archie," he said, turning to me. "Tomorrow you will summon them here, all of them, not as accusers, but as accused. They have trespassed against reason, and that I will not abide." Mariana drew in a breath, sharp, almost frightened. I knew better. Wolfe wasn't planning to stage a trial. He was preparing an execution, the kind done with words, deduction, and the cold precision of a mind that missed nothing. The last Halloween party wasn't over. The real unmasking was about to begin. The next morning broke with the kind of crisp October air that makes people think the city is clean. Wolfe didn't notice. He was upstairs with the orchids, and I was at my desk drafting the invitations that weren't invitations at all. They were summonses, written in Wolfe's deliberate phrasing, with just enough sting to make refusal impossible. Each one went out by messenger, to Pruitt at her velvet office, to Nash in his glass co-working hive, to Vale at her studio, to Everly through the paper where he scowled for a living, and to Reinhardt in his marble-lined law firm. Wolfe had instructed me to be concise. "You are required at the brownstone this evening at 7 o'clock. Attendance is not optional. Signed, Nero Wolfe." By noon, the replies began trickling in. Vale sent back a polite acceptance, phrased like a dinner RSVP. Pruitt responded with a scrawled note that smelled faintly of perfume and fury. Nash called directly, his voice trying to sound casual while it trembled around the edges. Of course, I'll be there." Everly didn't reply at all, which was reply enough. Reinhardt sent a terse acknowledgement written in the same controlled hand he'd used to draft his bogus papers. They'd all come. The guilty don't skip an audience if they think they can still win it. Wolfe spent the afternoon in silence, reading the documents Mariana had brought, cross-referencing with what Saul had photographed. His face betrayed nothing, but I'd learned to read the pauses in his breathing, the way his eyes lingered an extra beat on a line of text. Each pause was a nail being driven. Mariana stayed in the front room, restless. She'd taken off the porcelain mask, but still carried herself as though it were there. When I brought her coffee, She asked the question she'd been circling since the night before. What if they don't break? What if they double down? They'll break, I told her. Wolfe doesn't let them leave otherwise. At 7 sharp, the first bell rang. Fritz admitted them one by one, and I guided them into the office like players being shown to their marks. Pruitt entered first, in another splash of color, her chin high as if daring Wolfe to comment. Nash came second, fidgeting with his cuffs. Vale floated in behind them, soft-voiced and too sweet by half. Everly stomped in, cloak replaced by an ill-fitting suit, his mouth already curled for attack. And finally, Reinhardt, precise, immaculate, maskless now, but no less composed. They took their seats in a semicircle, all eyes on Wolfe. He didn't rise, of course. He sat in his chair, immense and immovable, with the globe at his side and the desk between him and their combined animosity. He let the silence build until even Pruitt's bravado thinned. You sought to employ artifice as truth, Wolfe said at last, his voice a rumble that filled the room without haste. You assembled props, scripts, and accomplices to construct a tribunal. You accused Miss Dacre of theft, not to seek justice, but to seize profit. You failed. Pruitt bristled. We didn't fail. We revealed her for what she is. Pfui, Wolfe said, a single syllable that cut sharper than any rebuttal. You revealed yourselves. You relied on documents you dared not expose, witnesses who faltered, and performances so contrived that even your audience revolted. Mr. Panzer's photographs confirm that Miss Vale furnished Mr. Reinhardt with altered pages mid-proceeding. That, madam, is not testimony. It is forgery. Vale's lips parted, but no words came. Reinhardt stiffened, but did not deny it. Wolfe's eyes shifted. Mr. Everly, in your intemperance, you abandoned the script. You spoke of her stealing from us. A slip, but a telling one. The object was not the charity, but the charter you rewrote to funnel its assets into your hands. Everly's face reddened, his jaw working. She quit. She betrayed us first. You betray yourselves, Wolfe said evenly. And Mr. Nash, your debts are no secret. The urgency of your participation requires no further comment. Miss Pruitt sought spectacle. Miss Vale, relevance. Mr. Everly, vengeance. Mr. Nash, relief. Mr. Reinhardt, authority. Together, you conspired to ruin a woman not for her guilt, but for your gain. The room was still. The only sound was the faint tick of the wall clock. Then Reinhardt leaned forward, voice measured. You cannot prove this in court. None of this is admissible. Wolfe's brows rose a fraction. Perhaps not. But you came here because you knew you could not escape exposure. Tonight you face a different tribunal. You may attempt to explain yourselves to me, or you may face the ruin of your reputations when this farce becomes public record. Pruitt surged to her feet. You wouldn't. I would, Wolfe said, voice like stone, and I will unless you concede. You will withdraw all accusations against Miss Dacre. You will restore her standing, and you will relinquish any claim to the fund. Otherwise, your conspiracy will be laid bare. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Nash, his voice breaking, said, We can't. If this gets out. It already has, I said from the wall. Half that party saw through you. Phones were recording. Your little play isn't staying private. The fight went out of them in stages. Vale crumpled first, whispering that it had gone too far. Nash sank into his chair, face pale. Everly muttered curses, but not denial. Pruitt trembled with rage, but her words failed her. Only Reinhardt held steady, though even he couldn't disguise the sheen of sweat on his forehead. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. It is finished. Archie, see them out. They left one by one, their grandeur shredded, their silence heavier than argument. When the door closed behind them, Mariana sat motionless, then whispered, You saved me. Wolfe's eyes opened. No, you saved yourself by not collapsing. I merely arranged the debris. Dinner was served soon after. As we sat, Wolfe lifted his glass. The folly of men and women, Miss Dacre, is inexhaustible, but their illusions are not. Remember that. She nodded. I caught her eye and gave her a small grin. For once, she didn't need a mask. Dinner that night had the calm weight of a closing curtain. Fritz served lamb with rosemary, potatoes that would make a banker forgive insolvency, and a burgundy Wolfe had been saving for weeks. Mariana ate sparingly, though not out of nerves, more like someone unused to sitting at a table where the knives were only for food. Wolfe consumed his portion with his usual precision, pausing only to sip, dab his lips, or issue a remark that landed like a stone in still water. "You must understand," he told her between bites. "What occurred here is not unique. The impulse to disguise greed as justice is as old as law itself. You are fortunate that their vanity overpowered their discretion." Mariana set down her fork. "Fortunate? That was planned." Wolfe inclined his head, conceding without elaborating. I filled the space. "You held up well," I said. "Most people handed a stage like that would have wilted. You made them do the sweating." Her mouth curved faintly. "I've spent 10 years organizing illusions, Mr. Goodwin. I know how fragile they are." Wolfe grunted. "Then remember the lesson. Illusion requires complicity. Withdraw yours, and their stage collapses." He pushed his plate forward, signaling Fritz that the lamb had passed muster, and leaned back. "Archie, coffee." I brought the tray in, poured for each of us, and sat again. For a few minutes the room was quiet, but not tense. The storm had broken, and the silence felt earned. It was Wolfe who steered it forward. "Miss Dacre," he said, "you will take steps tomorrow to secure the fund's charter. I expect the conspirators will not challenge you openly now, but they may attempt subtler sabotage. Ensure the accounts are audited and the records duplicated. Leave no crevice for tampering." She nodded, firm. "I will." "You will also," he continued, "distance yourself from them socially. Such entanglements corrode judgment." "I already have," she said. "Last night made it final." Wolfe's eyes closed, satisfied. "Then our arrangement is concluded." But I could tell Mariana wasn't done. She turned to him, her gaze steady. "You did more than defend me, Mr. Wolfe. You dismantled them. If I had money enough, I'd pay you double." Wolfe waved a hand, dismissive, but not displeased. "Your fee suffices. Gratitude is not currency I accept." She looked as if she might press the point, but she stopped, perhaps realizing that for Wolfe, a dismissal was the highest acknowledgement she'd get. She finished her coffee in silence. By 10, Fritz had her coat ready, and I walked her to the door. The night was colder now, the streets quieter, Halloween reduced to candy wrappers scuttling in the gutters. At the stoop, she paused. "Will they try again?" "They won't," I said. "Not in the same way. They've burned that theater down, but people like them don't forget losing." Her expression tightened, then softened. "If they try, I'll know who to call." I tipped my hat. "Next time, try a different holiday." She laughed, quick, real, and descended the steps. A cab swung by and she disappeared into it, back into a city that would still be buzzing about the party long after the masks were boxed away. When I returned to the office, Wolfe was already deep in a book, glass of beer beside him. He didn't look up as I entered. "She will recover," he said. "Sure," I said, dropping into my chair. "But I wonder about the others. Pruitt, Nash, Vale, Everly, especially. They didn't look like people who were finished." "They are finished," Wolfe replied without moving his eyes. "Exposure is a solvent. What remains is residue." I stretched, staring at the ceiling. "Residue can still smell." "Not here," he said. And that was that. For Wolfe, once the logic was done, so was he. He had no interest in watching the aftershocks, but I did. because somewhere in the city, Pruitt was raging, Nash was calculating, Vale was weeping, Everly was cursing, and Reinhardt was already drafting ways to preserve his pride. And though they'd lost, people with that much ego rarely retired quietly. Still, in the brownstone, peace had returned. The orchids upstairs would get their due at dawn. Fritz would plan tomorrow's meals, and Wolfe, satisfied with another case dismantled, would sleep soundly. As for me, I sat with my coffee cooling beside me and thought about the party. About a woman in a porcelain mask who refused to break, and a room full of people who did. About illusions collapsing and the strange relief of watching truth win, even if it had to claw its way there. When the clock struck 11, Wolfe finally closed his book and regarded me. "Archie," he said, "tomorrow we resume routine. I will not have the orchids disturbed by masquerades." "Fine by me," I said. "But if another masked woman shows up at the door, you're answering it." He gave me a glare over the rim of his glass. Then he drank, and the brownstone settled back into its old rhythm, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But I knew better. Illusions might collapse quickly, but their shadows linger. And for the 5 who had tried to play justice on a stage, those shadows were going to follow them a long, long time. The following day, the brownstone resumed its rhythm with a kind of precision that Wolfe liked to imagine was eternal. The orchids upstairs demanded their attention. Fritz orchestrated breakfast as if the kitchen were a pit orchestra, and Wolfe reinstalled himself in his chair with the morning paper and the kind of calm that suggested nothing unusual had ever passed through the house. To the casual eye, the storm had ended, and the sky was clear again. But storms leave traces, and though Wolfe would never admit to sentiment, he was as aware of the residue as I was. By noon, the papers had already begun to stir the pot. Lon Cohen sent me a clipping from the Gazette, an anonymous piece about a prominent Halloween gathering disrupted by internal conflict. The reporter hadn't named names, but anyone with half an ear to the ground could trace the outlines. A charity, accusations, a trial that collapsed under its own theatrics. New York loves a scandal more than it loves truth, but now and then the two overlap. I brought the article into Wolfe. He read it, lips tightening at the corners, and folded it with unnecessary precision before setting it aside. "It will suffice," he said. "You think they'll crawl back under their rocks?" I asked. "They have little choice," Wolfe replied. "They attempted to weaponize illusion. Illusion requires the audience's complicity. Having been exposed, they will find the audience less obliging next time. A stage once revealed as false is not easily rebuilt." "Maybe," I said. "But I've got the feeling Pruitt won't take the hint. She had the look of a woman who'd rather reinvent the stage than walk away." "Let her," Wolfe said with a dismissive wave. "Her talent for spectacle will consume her. We need not concern ourselves." And there it was, the line drawn. For Wolfe, the case was closed. The structure had been laid bare, the truth arranged, the house restored to silence. His interest had ended the moment deduction became conclusion, but the echoes weren't so easily dismissed outside the brownstone. Saul called later in the afternoon to tell me Nash had been seen leaving his office with a face like curdled milk, muttering into his phone. Vale had cancelled 2 upcoming events, claiming illness. Everly had written a column dripping with bile but conspicuously free of specifics, and Reinhardt had vanished into the folds of his law firm, no doubt polishing denials. Pruitt, Saul reported with a dry chuckle, was planning a new production. Something grand, something public. No mention of Mariana, but the scent of retaliation was there. I passed this along to Wolfe. He listened, eyes shut, fingers steepled, and after a long silence said, "Let them gnaw at their bones. They will not return here." That was his way of dismissing shadows, but I couldn't quite shake the sense that this particular troupe hadn't played its last note. The city thrives on reinvention, and people who trade in masks don't quit after one performance. Toward evening, Mariana came back to the brownstone, not masked this time, not even guarded. She carried herself differently, as if some invisible weight had been peeled away. Wolfe greeted her with the same incline of the head he might grant a head of state, or a butcher, depending on the day. "I came to thank you," she said, standing before his desk. "Unnecessary," Wolfe said. "You paid for my services, and you received them." "It's not unnecessary to me," she replied. "You didn't just stop them. You taught me how to see them clearly. That matters." He accepted the compliment with silence, which was as much as she'd get. I walked her out afterward, and on the stoop she turned to me. "Do you think they'll try again?" "Not the same way," I said. "But people like that don't retire quietly. Just don't give them another stage." She nodded, thoughtful, and then gave me a look that was half gratitude, half warning. "I won't." A cab came rolling down the block, and she climbed in without looking back. When I returned, Wolfe was already deep in another book, the case filed away in his mind as neatly as Fritz filed silverware. I sat at my desk, the sound of the city drifting faintly through the window, and thought about Mariana, about Pruitt and her crimson gowns, about the way illusions collapse when the script goes wrong. The brownstone was quiet again. Too quiet, maybe, after the storm. Wolfe sipped his beer, eyes scanning a page, and finally spoke without looking up. "Archie, men and women are endlessly inventive in their self-deception. They prefer masks because masks excuse them, but a mask, once removed, cannot be replaced without ridicule." I leaned back, smiling. "That's your final word?" He closed the book, set it on the stand, and looked at me. "My final word is this. Appetite, Archie, is the only honest constant. Whether for food, for money, for admiration, or for vengeance, it unmasks everyone. It is the truth beneath every disguise." He lifted his glass and drank, and that was that. The case of the last Halloween party was finished. Outside, the city moved on, chasing its next delusion. Inside the brownstone, dinner was waiting. The orchids were undisturbed, and Wolfe had already turned the page. I jotted the last notes in my book, shut it, and let the silence settle back into its rightful place. That's how it goes with Wolfe. Illusions rise, illusions fall, but the brownstone remains. And when the world outside decides to put on another show, there's always a chair waiting, and a man who never leaves it, ready to cut the script to pieces.